Hello and welcome to another segment of Love Revolution. I'm your host, Mia Saenz. And in this segment with me is the beautiful Tova Garr. She's sitting right next to me. Don't you just love that name? Eva Gabar, Tova Garr. I just love it. So Tova is this really amazing teen children activist. She works with moms and kids on understanding relationships between them and we're all women here and some men watching too, but really us as females really need that support with our daughters and our sons when we move through these preteen hormonal stages and as they grow. So before we send it over to Tova here, do as you always do. Pause it if you need to do your breathing. Remember, breathe in and out 3 times deeply and exhaling slowly. Go get your yummy drink if you didn't bring it with you. Get your notepads and pens and everything to journal. And let's just enjoy this moment. This is the last taping of the show. And in fact, we'll just say she graces us with the last of the show. So I'm very excited about this because I haven't actually closed out with anybody yet. So you're it, baby. So everyone, this is unpause us when you're pauses. I'm getting unpause and pause mixed up. So pause us if you need to and unpause us when you're ready to go. So I'm going to send you to my beautiful friend who's a writer for Bellamy magazine. We went through a business coaching course about 3 years ago. I adore this woman. Whenever she comes to LA, we hang out. And I haven't been to New York yet during our friendship, but when I do, same thing. So I love Tova. So let me share with you my friend Tova. It's all yours,
Thank
honey.
you, Mia. Thank you. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. I really, truly appreciate it, and I appreciate our friendship. I know that I have learned a tremendous amount from you in the time that we've known each other. So thank you for that. And thank you for letting me be here today. I spent a lot of my time these days, working with mothers and daughters and working on their relationship, working on teaching them how to communicate with each other. So they can have the relationship that they want. And so the girls, as they're going through adolescence, which is, as we know, such a complicated, challenging time, even if you are the most stable, relaxed kid ever, that's when we develop so many of our false beliefs. It's when our life is shaped in so many ways. It's when, in many, many ways, our relationship with the future men of our lives is shaped. It's a time when our relationship with ourself is shaped, and a time when our relationship with our family is shaped. And so if mothers really knew how to help their daughters at a time where often that connection is broken, I think we would have a different world. And I got into this work because, well, first of all, I've always worked with teens and young adults. It's been my passion since I was a teenager. I have to say that there's no doubt that God led me in this direction. It was what I always knew I wanted to do, even when I was going to school and it was clear that I wanted to work in the informal world of education. People kept saying to me, this is not a profession. And I kept saying, yes, it is. So I always stuck to it. I always knew that this is what I wanted. But as I started doing my own personal growth work, and I always did meaningful things. I always help people explore their identity. But when I really started looking at my own and looking at my own story and looking at my own pain, one of the things that I was clearly able to see was how I had disconnected as a teenager. How on the outside I looked like this perfect kid who had it all going, right? I was popular, I was fairly good looking, I was getting all the right positions in the youth group that I belonged to. I never was left out. I wasn't so great in school, but that was, to be honest, my choice. Simply didn't feel like investing in it, but that's a family story that's too long for today. But yet I always felt left out. I always felt like I didn't matter. I had a tremendous amount of inner pain, and it was never accessed. My true gifts, my amazing intuitive abilities, my deep connection, all these things that make me who I am, were things that were not validated. by my surroundings. They were definitely not validated by my mother, who I'm happy to say has then shifted her own life and now totally gets it, but not when I was a teenager. And I was constantly dismissed for following my intuition, for following my inner voice, as not being good enough, right? There had to be a list. There had to be a reason for everything that I did. My instincts weren't a good enough reason. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And I just held that pain deeper and deeper, created layers and layers and layers of protection around myself. And what resulted is that I essentially became a young adult who was completely disconnected from who I really was. I was showing up to the rest of the world as, now I can say, a fairly angry, frustrated, not very patient person, which people who know me now are like, what do you mean you're the most patient person in the world? But that's how I was showing up on the outwards, because that's how I had learned to protect myself. But the real Tova was only visible to very few select people who I felt safe enough to share that part of me with. And I don't want that to happen, not to anybody who's listening to me today, not to any girl in this world, because this world will be different if all women will live who they are meant to be. It'll just be a different world, I have no doubt. So many of us are not. So what I wanted to talk about today was the love between a mother and a daughter, because it is the most precious thing, and yet it is the most challenging thing, right? If we look at the image and the pictures that we see of mothers and daughters, they're always smiling, they're hugging, it's happy, they're shopping together, they're, having a great time. And I always say, well, let's look what's going on behind that picture, right? It's kind of like those Facebook pictures that we see on the first day of school. Everybody looks super happy and can't wait to get to school. We don't see the fear of, am I going to make new friends? Am I going to be left out? Am I going to be bullied again? What's going to happen to me? We don't see any of that. And the first thing that we need to do is give ourselves permission to let go of that pretty picture of maybe what we want our relationship to be, and to acknowledge what the relationship really is or what it was. Because we all have complicated relationships with our mother, no matter what. Really, I have incredible parents. I am so lucky. Really, I know I'm so lucky. And they're educators, and they are mindful. They were mindful parents, and they taught me so many of the skills that I even use in my work today. And yet, what they lacked was the ability to connect and relate to who I really was, and to take the time to discover what was really going on behind that pretty picture. And, some of us have more complicated relationship with our parents. I know, even thinking about my father, his relationship with his mother was complicated until the day she died. It was never healed and could never be healed because she didn't really want it to. And, I think of a good friend of mine, the day she had her daughter, and it was her first. And she said to me, and I spoke to her like a couple of weeks later, right after the initial glow, right, of I just had a baby, my life has changed. And I said, how are you doing? And she said, I realized that day was the best and the worst day of my life. It was the best day because I learned this deep love that I never experienced before on that kind of level. And yet at the same time, I had this hate that I couldn't share with anybody, because suddenly this little creature had completely changed my life. Right? I could no longer do anything without taking her into consideration. And I really honored her for sharing that with me, because it's not a story that many people tell. But
realize right away.
Or even realize right away. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that she had that awareness, which is probably partially because she was an older mother, and who she is, which is incredible. But I think that that's probably true for many women. And what that just develops throughout the years in a lot of different ways that we're often not even aware of, right? We're not aware of the resentment we might feel towards our daughter because of just her existence means that we can't do this, or we have to do that. Or, one of my clients I was speaking to the other day, we were trying to find a time for our sessions for me to work with her daughter. And her life is so programmed, both the daughters and the mothers, right? Now, it comes from a great place, but suddenly there's no freedom. There's no just being anymore. And what I see in my practice and what I see in my work is that this challenge and this intensity, right, of whatever your story is, and that's whether your story is your story with your daughter right now, or like me, it's your story with your mother, that story is there. And unless we give it space, and unless we start dealing with it, it affects our relationships everywhere. And it doesn't allow us to show up and to be the person that we want to be in those relationships, because we're constantly being affected by our history and by our past. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does.
So what I'd like to do in the short time that we have together today is try to take us through a few steps that I'd like everyone at home to try for themselves. So the first step is actually a simple one. It's simple actually, and it's complicated, I should say. Nothing is really simple, if we're honest. So I want you to take a look and figure out your own story. When you were a daughter, and in this case, I want you to use your teenage years, because they tend to be the years which are more complicated, where a lot of the tension comes up, and where a lot of stories that sometimes are very clear and out there, and sometimes aren't come up. So examples are mothers of being jealous, right, of their daughters. Jealous either because their daughters are being and able to live a life they always wanted but couldn't for themselves. And there is jealousy and anger there that's hiding under that surface, whether it's because their kids are so much more privileged than they were. I have a client who grew up on a farm. Right? She had a really hard life as a child. She had no time for herself. Her as a self was not relevant. It wasn't part of the story when she was growing up. It was all about being part of the community that had to support the family farm. And when she sees her kids who are complaining about having to take out the garbage, what automatically pops into her mind is they don't know how good they have it, right? These ungrateful kids, right? They have everything. I had none of this when I was growing up, right? So she has this narrative that's going on that is affecting the way she is reacting to them when they are, as my father loves to say, acting their age, right? Or maybe they're jealous because they're making, or not necessarily jealous, but having a hard time because their daughter is reenacting exactly what they did when they were teens. And they regret it, wish they didn't, and then fear comes in. And whatever your story is, right? You may have to be like me, and it may take you a little while to figure out what the real story is, right? What do you really look like behind those happy, successful pictures? Who were you really during those years? But figure out who you were, independent of being a mother today, if you are one. But who are you as a daughter during those years? That's step number one. Step number two is more challenging and one that we can't really get into today, but that's healing that process and allowing yourself to go back to that place in an environment that is appropriate. And whether doing it in person with your mother or doing it in other ways, there's so many methods today to heal a relationship, whether it's empty chair clearings, through meditation, through therapy, through, the kind of work that you do, Mia. There's so many ways to heal relationships, even if that person isn't alive, even if that person isn't available, or even if that person doesn't want to be a part of that healing process, if they're not interested. But allowing yourself to come to terms with whatever your story is, no matter how easy or challenging, acknowledging it, allowing yourself to forgive the other person, and more importantly, to forgive yourself. Right? Because if it was a challenging relationship, and by the way, I'm saying if, but the truth is it was for all of us, then we also need to forgive ourselves. Because most likely we made a lot of choices during those years that had an effect on who we are today as adults. And I know I had to go through a deep process of forgiving myself for the implications, because some of the choices that I made back then had long-term effects on the life that I was living and the choices that I was making, right? And so like today at 40, I'm like, oh, why didn't I wake up earlier, right? Would have been amazing. What a life I could be leading.
Yeah.
But that's not healthy, right? We're all here for a reason. We all go through our own journey. So making sure that you're really healing that space for yourself and not for anybody else. It's not about anybody else. It's really about you. The reason, by the way, I say this is there's a client of mine who always reminds me of this, and I love her so much. First of all, because she's one of these women who made a decision to do work, and she attacks it. Like, she will make it happen no matter what. And I just love that. I love clients who are just like, I know this is going to be hard. It's okay to be hard, and I'm going to make it happen because this is more important than anything. Just love it. Anyhow, she came to me with because of a problem she was having with her daughter. Nothing about her. It was, she had found texts on her daughter's phone about communicating with a boy. They were of sexual, explicit nature. She was very disturbed. Her daughter was very young, and she needed help. So she came to me, and we started doing some work, and we started exploring how she could communicate better with her daughter to figure out what was really happening, what was the nature, how she could support her daughter, all things that were new to her and her relating to her daughter. But what we started finding out as we were working together was that one of the things that was happening is she was being so triggered by her daughter because her daughter was reliving her own experience. She had made bad choices. And so every time she looked at her daughter, she saw a reflection of herself, of the most painful part of herself. And until we could address it, until she could actually come to a place where she could say, I can see what's happening, without even doing full healing, but just the knowledge completely shifted the way she was showing up for her daughter. And therefore, the changes in her daughter are incredible. Right? From a girl who's starting to go through this very destructive path of making some very bad choices, suddenly her daughter is starting to connect to who she is. She's starting to make really good choices for what's good for her. She's kind of moved away. And she keeps saying to me, but she hasn't asked for her iPod back. And I'm like, because she doesn't need it anymore. Because it's not filling that need that it was filling. You're helping her feel that need in another way.
That's awesome.
And first of all, it makes me sing, like literally my heart sings every time I get off, one of our sessions. But it just shows what's possible when we allow ourselves to face those darker parts, because so often we don't. We put them aside, we shove them deep. I'm a master at shoving them as deep as possible and pretending they do not exist. Really, I'm so good at it. If I wanted to teach a class about what not to do, I'd be so good at it.
You'd be awesome. Really good at a class called cave diving or something. You got to go in and retrieve those things.
Keep going deep. Yeah, I'd be a master actually. It's probably why I love clients like that, because I'm really good at saying, "Oh, look how painful this is. This is exactly where I need to go."
Exactly. Yeah.
So yes, I would be a master. Anyhow, that's the next step. The step after.
First of all, I want to say that was brilliant, what you just shared. No, go ahead. Sorry. I had to share that because that's really powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. Yeah. It really is. It amazes me over and over and over again. And the next step is really saying, okay, what's really going on with your daughter, right? Because a lot of people say to me, I don't understand. I had this lovely, sweet, outgoing, friendly girl, and suddenly all I get is rolling eyes, slamming doors. She keeps telling me how horrible I am, how much I'm ruining her life, how I don't understand, and on and on and on and on. And just like, can I just have her back? And I would say she's there. She really, truly is. But you want to remember what she's actually going through, right? At this stage of adolescence, there's so much going on from the brain that is constantly changing right now and has a complete effect both on decision making, on action taking, on a focus on what's right and what's wrong, and the need for adventure and the need to experiment, which is all going on. Add the hormones to that, add body changes, and if you're a girl, that means that the boys are suddenly paying attention to you, whether boys your age or boys that are older, right? And for some, that's intimidating. Some girls discover early on that they actually suddenly have all this power over men they had no idea. And without even knowing who they are, they start using it, and that can sometimes be a very dangerous thing. Right. But with all that, she's also trying to figure out who she is, right? She's trying to figure out who she is and where she fits in the world. And part of that process also means separating from you. That is her job as a teenager, is to separate from you and become an independent person. And what that means is that means she has to push away from you, because if she doesn't push away from you, then she sees you as part of her. She sees you as one, and she can't function as an independent, successful adult. And when I see teenage kids who are very close to their mother in a way that isn't healthy, where they can't do anything without their mother, where they can't make any decisions, where their parents swoop in as soon as something happens or something's wrong, whether it's school or with friends, they're always fixing for them, right? Mm-hmm. From thinking it's a good place and from a place of protection, then I'm really, really worried. Mm-hmm. Because those are the girls who go off to college and have mental breakdowns. Mm-hmm. Or run off and marry somebody really inappropriate, really, really young, because they don't know how to do it alone. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes it works out. Sometimes they marry the right guy. Not saying it's always a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But it then takes them a lot longer to figure out who they are and what they're doing. And some of them, like this woman I met when I was doing my own work, who was 65, or maybe Mia, that's for you. But a woman who was 65, who had just opened her own business. It was the first time in her whole life she had ever done anything for herself. Mm. The first time.
Amazing, yeah.
And I was so impressed by her. Yeah. So impressed by her in so many ways. And so that's what's happening for them. And it is so painful, first of all, because she knows you better than anyone else. She knows what your pain points are. She knows how to trigger you really, really well. And what she also does is, because teenagers have a really strong sense of right and wrong, they have a real strong sense of justice, which is why teenagers create movements, global change movements all over the world, right? Because they can, and they believe that they can.
And they're also inspired by others who believe in them. Yeah.
Yeah. But that also means that when she looks at you, suddenly, after for years thinking you are God, right? You are perfection. Suddenly she sees truth. And the truth is that none of us are perfect. But that is shocking to a child, that their parent isn't perfect anymore. And in that hurt, they will do everything to point it out to you. And when you're not being honest and genuine, they will tell you. And when you're not living your truth, they will make sure that you know that you're not. Yeah. So in some ways, I say, look at it as a gift, right? Your teenager is actually reflecting to you where you're not living your truth. And where maybe it's time to think about that. Mm-hmm. But first of all, so just map it out. I know that was a little long, but just map it out. Figure out what's going on. Notice and learn about what stage your daughter is in her life. And then the next step is, I want you to remember what your role is. And this is where so many parents fail, is they forget that their job in this dynamic is to be the parent. This is not a spouse relationship. This is not you and your parents. This is not you and your friends. It's not you and your significant other. This is you and your child. And in you and your child relationship, when they are an adolescent, your job is to be the parent. And that means your job is to not get triggered when they're working on triggering you, to not lose your cool, to not think about how you've just been deeply wounded and hurt and insulted and want to retaliate, or make sure you make it clear to them who's the boss, right? You want to do something that is very hard to do, but you want to take that deep breath that we were doing today at the beginning of the session. Remind yourself that what you're really here for is to help this beautiful girl figure out who she is, understand why she's doing what she's doing. If she's making a bad choice, see that she's making a bad choice and deal with the consequences of it, but not get sucked into the drama. Not get sucked into the roller coaster of emotion that she has the unfortunate luck of being through and that everybody goes through. Don't go back there. Mm-hmm. Don't become a teenager again. Don't parent your teenager as a teenager, which I see so many people do. Parent as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Learn how to communicate. Learn what you need to do, which is really our last step, which is, if I could send you with one important thing today, is that I want you to learn to listen. There are two things that you could do which will be the biggest gift for your daughter. Listen and ask questions. Questions that you actually care about and that will allow not only you to understand what's really going on for her and digging deep. No, when you ask a teenager a question, you will not get the full answer. Not the first, second, third, or probably even 10th time that you ask. You have to ask a lot, not only because they're reluctant to share what's really going on with them because they're afraid they may lose your love if they tell the truth, but also because they don't always necessarily know. And sometimes they need your help to discover what is it that's really going on, what's really motivating their behavior and what they're doing. And create an environment for your daughter where you can be the one who's supporting her to be her best self. Do your own work. Do it on the side. It will only help your relationship with your daughter. Awesome. But remember that in your relationship and the two of you being there together, your job is to be her guide, to help her make sure that she goes through these years connected to who she is, her unique blueprint on this planet, and figuring out what she was meant to do here, not what anybody else wants her to do here, even you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. You know me having two boys and unfortunately no girls, no daughters, but it goes the same for boys too. This is perfect, so those of you who just have boys, don't say, hey, I'm left out. No way. Because a lot of this is really important for our male children too. I love the fact that as moms, we have to grow in order to be a beautiful, supportive system for our beautiful offsprings. And it's really one of the most magnificent times. I remember we hit, unfortunately, in my family with my children, we hit a survival mode very early on. 9/11 tossed me to the curb, and it really destroyed our family. Not because anything physically happened to us, but we were living in fear. I was living in fear from my childhood PTSD, or PTSDC for complex. So to actually be there for your child and to grow past your own crap, to be able to re-raise or raise these kids up beautifully is very powerful. So I really honor and love the work that you do. Focusing in on our youth is one of the most magnificent gifts. I love that you work with these people. I love to work, obviously, with older ones. Children, man.
It's okay. I'm told all the time that I'm crazy. And I'm like, but I love teenagers. They're awesome.
I think it's fantastic because there's not enough people that actually move forward and do this work. We have to honor, if we want to honor one another, we honor our children too. We honor our youth because they are, it's cliche, they are our future. And I don't mean it in a cliche way, but if we think back to the episodes that we had growing up and how painful a lot of them were, why the heck would we want to bless our most blessed with that experience? So get busy on your own stuff, ladies and gentlemen watching, because these children are so magnificent and so brilliant. I'm just so in love with our babies and our elementary school kid age and our teenagers, and the 20s. I mean, they're still growing and learning too. It's a beautiful system, beautiful age. So thank you, Tova. This was awesome. And you have a free gift for us.
I do. I almost forgot about it. So if you were saying to yourself, okay, I got the first part, I'm either already working on it, that's why I'm here, and I can see this, but I'm not really sure how to take those steps to actually create the relationship I want with my daughter. How do I open that door, both physically and metaphorically, into the life of my daughter. So what I've prepared for you is a short teaching video that I prepared with the 5 steps that you can take to actually make that happen in your own life for yourself.
That's brilliant. And she's also very, very fun to know, Tova is. So if you have questions, she's there to answer them. Awesome. Well, thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate you joining us and sharing your wisdom. And thank you for closing out the very last episode, because, every segment has been very powerful. And this is really brilliant. We need to send our little babies off in these beautiful little baskets of love. I was seeing rocket ships, so okay, send them off in a rocket ship. So it was lovely.
We should. That is our job. Our job is to send them off in rocket ships for them to go do their own exploring and figure out who they are meant to be. So 100%. Thank you for letting me be here. It's been an honor, always.
I can't do things. Well, of course I can do things without you. I love to include you. Is the wording I should come up with. All right, thank you, sir. Did you want to say one last thing to the audience before we say goodbye?
Yes. Remember how much power you have. And remember that if you lead with love, even if you don't lead with perfection, everything is fine. That's what's most important.
That's awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tova. It was awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us for this series of Love Revolution. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be with you all. And remember to communicate with us still through the Rainbow Heart Classroom on Facebook. And everyone there wants to answer your questions, all these magnificent speakers, teachers. We just have loved this experience, as I've said before, in written messages and stuff. This has been the most fun out of the last 4 years that I've done 4 series a year. This has been the most amazing experience for me, because it's all been about loving the women that I've been with here on camera and loving you guys. Of course, I always love you guys, but just loving every aspect of it. So thank you all for joining us. And we're here, so write us and we'll communicate. Much love to you all. Bye.